this morning on our theme, what I'm waiting for people to join us on our theme, Sustainable Clusters for All, boosting collaboration opportunities for inclusive impact. We've had some interesting conversations. I'm just trying to scroll down there to the things that we've spoken about since we first gathered. Our first substantive topic, of course, was on sustainable clusters for all. A very interesting keynote address we've had there, inspiring stories of clusters from CCDI, and a live talk which I found incredibly enlightening. And that creative challenge by Patricia, I don't know exactly what she was getting us to do there, but it seems like it all worked. And the lessons that you shared have been captured and are going to be put to good use, helping us as we navigate our way forward. So that has been absolutely fantastic, and I found the experts clinic as well to be quite enlightening. So we move on now, and we focus on our vision for the future, and that is the topic that we're tackling this afternoon. And it's in two parts. Let me see. Yeah, it's in two parts. So the first part is where we're going to be hearing about global cluster trends, and I really look forward to that as another crucial learning opportunity for us. So we're going to be hearing about that, and the next part of that is when we're going to be focusing on next generation of cluster policies. So before we go for breakouts this afternoon, these are going to be our two sessions. And by the way, I hope you did enjoy your lunch. So I'm going to invite TCI President Merete to do the first part of the two that I've introduced, a vision for the future, covering global cluster trends. So Merete, I hand it over to you.
Besides you have great qualities in running the tourism sector, I think you have a talent in journalism and keeping the flow and speaking like a news host. So it's great to have you help on this, helping the flow going. Yeah, so welcome back after lunch. I hope you enjoyed the morning. I have around 10 minutes, 15 minutes to share a bit some of the trends we detect with our cluster members around TCI. Hope to make the clicker work at some point. So let us see if it's getting there. Way here. I'm going a bit back then. Yeah, cool. So what we try, I hope you got a bit of a flavor of this morning. We really try to reach out and speak to as many people around the world as we can. One thing we do besides flying challenges and solution boards, we also ask the members every year, what is happening in your location? What are you working on? What is happening? And then we try to compile it and see, okay, what is the new topics and new trends people are working on? And then we try to share it so everybody, collectively can become a bit wiser. We can all adapt whatever we're working on. So this is some feedback we got from our members around the world. A tendency we see is this idea that we talk about clusters in many places, so that's great. But we also see a tendency that in many places they use new words. So, and that's nice as well. So it might be an alliance or a hub or a platform, a network, an ecosystem, a partnership, a lab. You can add your own version as well. But in the end, when you look into it, it really, in many examples or cases, really looks like a cluster organization. So the change is not that big. So the good part of that is, of course, that, okay, many people acknowledge this. Cluster collaboration is essential for any kind of economic strategy. The challenge is that we have quite many competing initiatives around in many countries, and some of the words might be a bit more sexy. We talked about that morning, new sexy things coming along that actually compete with our existing cluster policy. But we also see, and we talked a lot about this morning, that clusters are really a key driver of transition. And I think this changes a bit the original idea in a cluster. So you also need to look into the future, you need to see what comes next, and you need to offer support to SMEs. SME is like essential in any cluster. I think it came out really strong this morning. But we need to offer more support on helping SMEs on that transitional pathway. We also see more policymakers now incorporating this transitional approach in cluster calls. I know in Norway they talk about clusters as engines of transition. This kind of thinking is what we see in more and more cluster policy programs. We also need to show the benefit. We talked also about that. So show it to the stakeholders, show it to others, because we see the tendency, if we're not clear enough, then other sexy words comes along. So they are drivers of transition, and different kinds of new foresights or trends observatories or more flying ideas is something that many are working on now as we try to understand this new reality we tackle. Something we try to do in TCI as well, because we're a lot about sharing best practice and hearing great stories from Iceland or Catalonia, like we just did Austria. But sometimes we also recognize that we might not have the solution already. And especially on this green transition topic, where there's really a need for scale and pace and spreading across the world. We have facilitated like these green labs, where we invite different stakeholders. We have Vincent with us in the room from Canada, and Tony from Taiwan that couldn't be here. But Tony from Taiwan said, yeah, but we also want to make that transition in Taiwan, and we have a lot of SMEs, and to be frank, we really don't know what to do. So can you help us a bit? So we facilitated these labs and shared, okay, what are you doing there? Something to learn from here. And Tony is now compiling an ebook, we will also share that, on how to make some of those transition. So building more cross-sectoral bridges is also a topic comes across. So clusters, like in the classical thinking, is a lot, sectoral, one branch, one sector. And this is not really enough anymore. We heard from Iceland a huge mapping of many stakeholders around the tourism sector, but this is also what we see in many other sectors. You need to go a little bit outside your classical cluster, and you need to facilitate more collaboration outside your cluster. Some of that has become more digital. I think when we meet today, it's also nice to meet in person, no doubt about it. But the digital bridges has really helped and increased the collaboration. So we can see now that clusters act as kind of a gateway to other systems, so ecosystems. So of course, a lot of that collaboration is still, classical business-to-business collaboration, partner visits, studies tours, market visits. But it's also about understanding, we heard from Australia, what is happening in your food innovation system? And using that as a compass to understand, okay, what is happening there? And we might not even have the time anymore to do that analysis or doing that, research in a proper way, but just having that, reality check with food sector people across the world is a way of navigating the future. And some clusters really work with that at a very, very deep and very profound level in using that. Joan Marti from Axio talked about strategic focus. So using other clusters as a way of navigating whatever you do. So we see many clusters collaborating. We estimate around 8,000 organizations around the world. Something definitely for us still to work on to improve the numbers. But we see that kind of organizations in many locations now. And this is also a new thing, that it's not just the natural clusters, but a range of initiatives that trying to tackle these challenges and are collaborating in many new ways. Yeah, of course, many new analyses are being undertaken. Many try to map what is happening, what are new clusters in robotics. I heard about space yesterday, gaming, artificial intelligence. So many are looking into new, more innovative, more disruptive sectors, so trying to map that out. And we try to develop that and incorporate in the cluster policy. So do we have like a top-tier program, or you have more emerging clusters, so how to build that together, and also how do we advocate clusters so it's not just in the cluster policy program, but also really in other sectors, in other policy areas. One thing we did to try and support that journey in TCI was last year we compiled some of the learnings we heard around the world on how to build the best cluster policy program. Because we see many places, we have the natural clusters, we have some cluster initiatives, cluster organizations, but we really still lack the strategy and the policy. And we didn't want to make it super complicated, so we made 6 core steps to really think about if you think about building the first program. And it builds from learnings across the world and trying to navigate that first cluster policy framework. And we see some taking those steps, and it's great to see that. So it's great to see where you have the cluster policy, there's finally a recognition of what you do. Now there's a support for the cluster policies. And as we heard sometimes this morning as well, there are some interlinkages with the industrial policy, the research and development policy, more policies now for green transition are also thinking about how can we use the clusters as this glue, as this tool for transition and for innovation. Yesterday I visited the footwear and leather cluster. It's very clear in that cluster strategy that it also links to some overall strategies around export and business promotion. So the good side of all of this is you come from a situation where there's no policies or no recognition, no support, and now you have a lot of interlinkages and things happening around clusters. But you can also imagine the challenge is it's a complexity. And a lot of that really goes down to the cluster manager, the cluster boards, and they need to navigate a much more complicated reality. There are still very few people working in many cluster organizations, and that we talked about the leadership skills, the board skills is really something that we see is something that many cluster organizations now are focusing on to improve that so we can hopefully be part of this bigger policy picture. We also see that many clusters are thinking more globally and bigger. Definitely a trend. EU Commission is later on speaking, Benoit. You supported this heavily with many different programs from the Commission, and definitely something many clusters have dived into. I still see this as one of the major challenges we have to work on how do we ensure more global funding, because I was just attending the EU conference in Prague. We heard about the global cosmetic cluster. So clusters building global systems for collaboration and having a lot of benefit for SMEs that would never have made it to the global markets. We also see a tendency around merging because we need to be bigger to tackle the challenges and creating new and different networks of clusters. I'm from Copenhagen, where we have a clean tech network. They've for many years been running this international clean tech network, and Cape Green in Cape Town is one of those partners. And that's actually one of the first examples we have of that goes just back 10 years. But I think that journey will just continue. And then we talked about improving collaboration within the clusters or through clusters. We heard some nice examples from Australia, from many places, on how we really are expanding the networks, bringing more players into the table, like Werner explained. Definitely a tendency we've seen in many places. So I know the struggle with policymakers, but sometimes you need to go a bit below. You need to find others that could join the cluster organization, work on topics around flooding, security, clean tech technologies, because many really struggle with finding the right solutions. And many of those, since you become bigger, you sometimes still need to focus, so you might need to put in place like some subcluster to make the collaboration even better. And then I think I spoke a lot with the people from BMA yesterday on the balance between virtual networking and physical networking. I think still something we need to work out. It's great we can be online and be efficient and meet across the world, but we also need to meet. We need to understand what is happening. We need to build the trust. We need to get into the details when we meet in person. Yeah, and no matter how big we become, how many transitions we are facing, how digital a lot of that is, it's really still about this power of people. So a lot about identifying the right people and bring them to the table. And we're still exploring some of the best practices around governance and leadership as those cluster organizations become more professional. So what is good cluster management and what is not so good? And how can we help and improve? We talked about skills training this morning. So how can we train the cluster managers and the board members to be more professional in helping these clusters on their way? And then there's more of these sub-topics on inclusiveness, on gender, and basically also involving civil society, because they will be inflicted by many of the invasions coming from the cluster. So how is this resonating? Does it make sense? Is this useful? Should you think of something else? So more involving civil society as part of clusters, or at least having different kind of dialogue with them. Yeah, so these were the global trends in 10 minutes. Amazing what we can do with TCI, but I hope it gave a flavor of some of the things and summing up a bit some of the discussions this morning. And now we have two great speakers coming on policy, so yeah, over to you, Septi.